What's going on, guys? We are working towards getting this 5.3 LS into my 94 Jeep Wrangler YJ. And now that we have our new Amazon harness and our computer back from getting reprogrammed, we should be able to run this engine standalone pretty easily. So let's do that. But before we can get this engine from looking like this to this, we got to get a few more things installed, starting with this new engine mount. So let's get into it. I got this stand off of Amazon. It was really inexpensive and it's really good quality. I wanted to make sure I had access to the flywheel because I hadn't installed it yet, and I want to make sure that I can get back there if needed. Now we can get it up and off the stand. Now we have full access to the rear main so we can get the flywheel installed. Here's what it looks like on its new stand. Here are all of the components that we are going to be adding to the engine before getting it started. Now that we have access to get the flywheel installed, let's start with that and the starter. When torquing the flywheel down, you could use either blue Loctite or red Loctite. For my application, I used red Loctite. And then we have a 3-step process to get this thing torqued down. The first pass will be 15 foot-pounds, then 37, and then 74. And now that our flywheel is installed, it's just 2 bolts to get the starter installed. Now we can move to the front where we'll get the Harmonic Balancer installed. I went to an auto parts store and rented a Harmonic Balancer installer tool. Now we can use the old bolt and torque this down to 240 foot-pounds. And now we can take out the old bolt and put in the new one and torque that down to 37 foot-pounds. And then for the last pass on the new bolt, we'll be putting it to 140 degrees. And now we know that it is tightened down properly. Now we can get our spark plugs installed. You should refer to your specific spark plug manufacturer for the torque specs on these. Since I'm not running the EGR on this build, I have the EGR block-off plate that I'm installing onto the manifold. Now that that's done, we can get our exhaust manifolds installed. We're going to torque these down to 11 foot-pounds and then 18 foot-pounds after that. And now we can get our spark plug wires connected to the spark plugs and all the coils. I clamped together some old Ford mufflers to these O2 brackets. That way I don't annoy the neighbors or my family when I start up the engine. Now we can install our O2 sensors. There's one to measure each side of the engine's exhaust. Time to start the wiring. I'm going to be running through this pretty quickly in this video, but if you want to see more of the wiring harness, check out my previous video where I go into a lot more detail. First, we're going to start with the coil pack. Then we have our idle air control, followed by our throttle position sensor. We're going to leave these wires up here for now, and we'll move on to our injectors. We obviously have 4 on each side. Before we leave the front driver's side, let's not forget to plug in the temp sender. And then the last 2 wires that we're going to leave unplugged for now are for the alternator and for the MAF sensor. Now we can move on to the back of the engine. We have one O2 sensor right here. Now we have our knock sensor up here and our camshaft position sensor right down here. This long wire harness here, we're not going to be using for the startup. This one is our vehicle speed sensor and our reverse lockout. Now we can get our second O2 sensor plugged in. And then this long plug right here is for our map sensor. I'm going to pause the video right here just to show you. Right here in this area, there is a spot that is meant for the brake booster to connect to the intake. Since we're not using the brake booster right now, I put a hose on there and then I just kinked it off so that we didn't cause any intake vacuum leaks. And now we can get the ground eyelets attached. I'm pretty sure where I'm putting these bolts into are for the bell housing. I'll move those later on. They're really accessible right now, so I'm just going to be using them for the video to ground the harness. Now we can do the passenger side coil pack and the passenger side injectors. And then on the bottom side here, we have the crankshaft position sensor plug. It's a little behind the starter, not too hard to get to, but it's just kind of back there. And now we have these 2 positive wire eyelets that are going to be going on the main starter post. This post is also going to be having the battery connected straight to it. It is the post that is going to constantly get power from the battery. We're going to put this nut on a little loosely because we have other things we're going to be putting on here as well. And now it's time to plug the harness into the computer. I got my computer reprogrammed at lt1swap.com. I sent it over to Brendan, and just a couple days later, he sent it right back, good to go. Luckily, we have our red side and our blue side marked out, so we know where the harness needs to go. Now we got these connected, we can just tighten up the bolts, and that is good to go. All right, time for the fuel pump. I have some fuel line connected to my old fuel harness that I got when I picked up the engine. This is a brand new paint can that I got from Ace, and I'm gonna be using it to create my mini fuel tank, and I ran them through the top of the paint can. I picked up this Walbro 255 fuel pump, and on the website, it had me put in my exact year, make, and model for my Jeep so that it can send me the right one that would work for that fuel tank. And since obviously the harness is still in the Jeep, I made up one really quickly just using a couple wires. I put the strainer on the bottom, and then we have this outlet port right here on the top. This hose here is our sending line. That will be going up the fuel rail and into the injectors. And I didn't show it in the video, but I did put a clamp on this part of the hose as well. I want to make sure that the pressure doesn't build up and push the hose off while it's running. You don't have to do anything to the other hose. That is the return line. Once the fuel goes up to the fuel rail, the fuel pressure regulator decides how much fuel is needed for the engine, and it sends back anything else, and it goes down that return line and goes back into the tank. And now we can get these lines connected to the fuel rail. This looks confusing. We just need to talk through everything because it's actually really simple. Let's start with the grounds because they're the easiest to do, and we'll get them out of the way. These negative wires, we're going to be connecting to the same area where we connected our negative eyelets earlier, right on the back of the engine above the flywheel. A portion of this is to ground the wiring harness, and then the other bit is to ground our fuel pump. This here is our ignition switch. We're going to be connecting this down to the starter. This wire is going to go from our battery positive post on the starter all the way over into our fuel pump relay. We're going to have it onto a relay, that way the computer can tell the fuel pump when to turn on and off. And this relay luckily came with the wiring harness. This long red wire goes to our ignition relay. I've connected it to this little switch so it will emulate putting your key into the on position. On and off. Super simple. This also turns the computer on and off so that the car won't turn over unless it's on. And then when we want to turn the engine off, we just switch it to off, just like a key. This red wire here is going to be for our fuel pump. It's going to be going to that fuel pump relay as well. This is going to be our main ground cable. This is going to be connected to the block of the engine, and then it's going to be going to the negative post on our battery. And then finally, we have our main positive cable that's going to be going from our battery positive post over to our starter positive post. That is a description for everything that's on the table. Let's start plugging things in so you can see how it actually goes. We're going to start with our negative cables. And like I said, we're going to be connecting them directly to where we put our other negative cables on the block earlier. And this negative wire, we're going to be going from the same area all the way over to our fuel pump, and that will be our fuel pump negative. And there we go. Now all we have to do is connect that right into our fuel pump line. Since we're working with the fuel pump, we can also do our fuel pump positive. We've already terminated this one, and we're going to be putting it into our fuel pump relay. I had to pick up these little terminal plugs on eBay. I'll put a link in the description as well as everything else that I've used for this build. All we have to do is get that clipped in to our fuel pump relay. And now we can run it down to our fuel pump. Now we can get started finishing up the fuel pump relay. One of these connections goes into the relay, the other one goes all the way over the engine and over to our starter positive post. Now our fuel pump is indirectly connected to power through this relay, so whenever the computer decides, it will give the fuel pump power. And now that it's wired up, we can put our relay back on. Now we can run our ignition wire, which is also going to be going up and over the engine over to where the starter is. And our main battery positive is also going to be going to the starter. I'll show you where everything goes right now. Here we are at the starter. We have our 2 wires from our harness. We have one of the wires from our fuel pump relay. We have another wire from the ignition. Then we have our last big wire that's going to be directly connected to the battery. All of these are going to be going on this main battery positive post. Obviously, if we had this in the Jeep ready to go, we'd be using a different method for this, but because we're going to be running it on the stand, I found this to be the best method to have everything that needs power get power from the battery right here. And since we're already down here at the starter, we can also get our starter switch connected. The starter switch is going to act like the key turning over the engine so that it'll start. We're going to take the negative connection and connect that to the little post on the starter solenoid. And then our red connection is going to be on the main positive post with all the other ones. And once we have the battery connected and we have the switch turned on, pushing this button will get the starter rolling. Our last cable is our main ground. And for the purpose of this video, we're going to be connecting it to the front of the engine block. Typically, there would be a water pump here, but for now, we can just put it right on there. And then like I said before, this switch right here is going to act like the key turning the car to the on position, which will turn on the computer and will start the fuel pump. We have our starter switch connected, and now we have both of our battery clamps connected. Now we just have a few more things to get done before we can turn this engine over. And the last things we have to do before getting this engine turned over is install our oil filter, and then we need to add oil and gas. Since the engine assembly has taken a little while, I want to give it every possible chance to make sure that there is oil in all areas of the engine. So we're going to be priming the system using this method I found on YouTube. We're going to be taking off the oil pressure sender, and we're going to be installing this barbed fitting. That way we can force oil into the system to make sure that it gets everywhere that it needs to be for the initial startup. And now we can connect our oiling system, which is actually a really cheap weed sprayer that we're going to be putting our oil into, pressurizing the system, and it will push oil throughout the engine. We can view our progress by taking off the filler cap and checking on the rocker arms. You'll see this front rocker arm is totally dry, which means that oil is not getting pushed in. Let's pressurize the system a little bit more. And now we can see that oil is starting to go up from our lifters to our push rods and into our rocker arm area. Now we know that everything is getting lubricated properly for this first startup. Now it's time to fill up our mini gas tank. Make sure that the fuel pump and the connectors are submerged in gasoline. Now we are ready to get this engine fired up. The last thing I did was disconnect that barb fitting, and I installed this oil pressure gauge to make sure that everything was getting good oil when we started up the engine. I hope you're ready to get this thing started up.
Our starter's ready to go.
All right, starts priming the fuel pump.
Hopefully the computer's ready.
Right, there it is, guys. That is the engine started up. I was a little worried when we heard that. That was our starter not disconnecting from our flywheel properly. But once I replaced the starter, that noise totally went away, and now the engine is firing up perfectly. And there we go, guys. That's how we run our LS engine on our makeshift engine stand. We obviously can't run it for too long because there's no coolant running through the system to get things cooled down. But it is holding great oil pressure. Everything sounds like it's running smooth. I am super excited to get moving forward with this project. I can't wait to get the transmission and the bell housing attached so that we can get this thing dropped into my 94 Jeep Wrangler YJ. Thank you guys very much for watching. If you want to keep up with this build, like and subscribe. It's super helpful, guys. And I will see you on the next video where we start getting the accessories installed. See you there, guys.